Hey English learners, welcome back to Mr. English Fluent Tutor, and welcome back to another wonderful episode. I am Anna.
And I am Abel.
Abel, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
What do you think about when you hear the words real English listening practice?
Honestly, Anna, when I hear that phrase, my first thought is something a little intimidating. I picture native speakers talking at an incredibly fast speed, throwing in tons of slang I have never heard before, and me just sitting there completely lost. Or I imagine those old, dry textbook audio recordings that sound so robotic and unnatural that I just cannot stay focused at all.
I completely understand that feeling, Abel, and you are definitely not alone in thinking that way. But here's the truth, and I want to say this clearly and warmly. Real English listening practice is not about surviving overwhelming fast speech or sitting through dull scripted recordings. It's about training your ears to hear natural rhythm, sentence stress, and everyday conversational flow through calm, clear, and genuinely engaging conversations like this one right here.
Oh, wow. That actually changes everything for me already. So it's not about throwing yourself into the deep end of the fastest, most confusing English you can find and hoping for the best. It's more about consistently exposing yourself to clear, natural dialogue, where you can actually follow the flow and build your understanding step by step. That sounds so much more manageable and honestly a lot more enjoyable too.
Exactly, Abel. And that's the beautiful starting point for everything we're going to talk about today. When listening practice feels natural and enjoyable, your brain actually opens up and absorbs so much more. The moment it starts to feel like a punishment or a test, your mind closes off. So the whole philosophy behind what we do here on this podcast is to keep it real, keep it calm, and keep it human.
That makes so much sense, Anna. And I think that's something a lot of English learners really need to hear right now. You do not have to be perfect to make progress. You just have to be present, willing to listen, and patient with yourself. Those three things together already put you ahead of so many people who give up because they think the journey is supposed to be painful.
That's such a wonderful way to put it, Abel. Being present and willing is already half the battle. And today, we have so many rich and practical ideas to share with you, our beautiful listeners, that are going to help you build your listening skills in a way that actually sticks. So let's jump right in and start with something I find really fascinating. I want to talk about attention and how we use it when we listen.
Oh yes, I love this one. I remember you once described daily listening attention in a really beautiful way, using a bottle of water, and that image honestly stayed with me for a long time after you explained it. I would love for our listeners to hear that today because I think it's going to resonate with so many people who feel like they're trying their best but not quite getting the results they want.
Yes, let's go there right now. So imagine that every single morning you wake up with a fresh, full bottle of water. That bottle represents your listening attention for the day. It's clear, it's clean, and it's full of potential. Now, the way you use that water throughout the day completely determines how much English you actually absorb and how much real progress you make in your listening journey.
Right, and I love where this is going. So if that bottle of water is my mental attention, then using it well is everything. It's like that water is incredibly precious and limited, and every choice I make about where I direct my focus either drinks the water in a nourishing way or just lets it pour out onto the floor and go to complete waste without me even noticing.
Exactly that, Abel. And here's where it gets really honest and real. When you put on an English podcast or video while you're scrolling through your phone, checking messages, looking at pictures, or doing 10 other things at once, that's pouring your valuable attention water directly onto the floor. The sounds are entering your ears, but they're not reaching your brain in any meaningful way. You're hearing, but you're not truly listening.
Oh, wow. That's such a powerful distinction to make. Hearing and listening are two completely different things, and I think so many learners, including myself at one point, confuse them all the time. I used to think that just having English playing in the background while I did other things was enough to make progress. But the truth is, my brain was barely registering any of it because my attention was scattered in 100 different directions.
Yes, and that is such an honest and relatable thing to admit, Abel, and I really respect that. So, what does drinking the water intentionally actually look like in real life? It looks like sitting down, putting your phone face down, pressing play on a clear and natural English conversation, and giving it your full, undivided attention for even just 40 minutes. That single focused session is worth more than 4 distracted hours of background listening.
40 focus minutes compared to 4 distracted hours? That contrast really puts things into perspective. And I think what makes that so powerful is that during those 40 intentional minutes, your brain is actually working. It is making connections, recognizing patterns in speech, noticing how sentences feel when they flow naturally. Your subconscious is filing away real language data that it can pull from later when you need it.
That is beautifully said, Abel. And the key word there is intentional. Intentional listening is an active, engaged process. You're not just a passive receiver waiting for information to fall into your head. You are leaning in. You're noticing rhythms and sounds. You're following the meaning even when you miss individual words. That active engagement is what makes the water truly nourishing for your language brain.
Right, and that brings up something I think is really important to say out loud. A lot of learners feel guilty if they miss a word or a phrase during a listening session. They immediately feel like they have failed or that their English is not good enough. But if you are in that intentional, engaged mindset, missing a word here and there does not mean you have stopped drinking the water. It just means you caught 90% and you are doing wonderfully.
Oh, I love that reframe so much, Abel. And yes, 100%. Catching the overall meaning and the emotional flow of a conversation is so much more valuable at this stage than understanding every single syllable perfectly. Real human conversations are full of little imperfections, overlaps, and moments where even native speakers miss a word or need clarification. That is just the nature of living, breathing spoken English.
Exactly, Anna. And hearing you say that makes me feel so much better about my own listening journey. I think there is this huge myth that if you're a good English listener, every conversation should be crystal clear to you all the time. But that is just not the reality for anyone, native speaker or not. Context, familiarity with the topic, and the speaking style of the person all play huge roles in how much you understand.
That is such a great point, and it brings us beautifully to our next idea, which I think is going to help so many of our listeners today. I want to talk about what I call the room with two windows, because I think so many English learners are spending too much time looking out of the wrong window, and it's making the whole journey feel so much harder and more discouraging than it needs to be.
Yes, I really love this analogy. I remember the first time I heard you describe this, and it genuinely shifted something in my thinking. The idea of having two different windows in a room, each showing you a completely different view of the exact same situation, is such a vivid and helpful way to understand how our mindset shapes our listening experience. Please, walk everyone through it.
With pleasure. So imagine you're sitting in a room and there are two windows right next to each other. The first window has cloudy, foggy glass. When you look through it, everything outside looks dark, blurry, and impossible. That cloudy window represents the mindset of frustration, where native English speech feels like an impossible wall that you're never going to break through no matter how hard you try.
And I have absolutely looked through that cloudy window before. It's that feeling where you hear a native English conversation and your brain just shuts down. Everything blurs together, the words run into each other, and you feel like you're standing outside a party where everyone is laughing and connecting and you can't even find the door. That frustration is real, and it's exhausting when it hits you hard.
Yes, and it's completely valid to feel that way sometimes. But here's the wonderful news. In that same room, right next to that cloudy glass, there's a second window, and this one is perfectly clear. When you look through this window, you see a beautiful green garden full of life and possibility. That clear window represents the mindset of growth, where you understand that listening is a muscle that gets stronger every single time you use it.
Oh, wow. I love that image so much. A green garden that is growing and alive. And the key thing I take from that is that growth doesn't always look dramatic or sudden. A garden doesn't transform overnight. It grows slowly, steadily, day by day, with the right care and the right conditions. And your listening comprehension works exactly the same way. Every session you put in is like watering that garden, even if you can't see the results immediately.
Exactly, Abel. And that patience is so important. Looking through the green garden window means you stop measuring your progress by whether you understood every single word in today's episode, and you start measuring it by whether you stayed present, stayed engaged, and stayed curious. Those three qualities are what actually water the garden and make the muscle grow stronger over time.
That is so beautifully put, Anna. And I want to add something that I think is really helpful here. When you shift from the cloudy window to the green garden window, you also start to notice different things during listening. Instead of fixating on the words you missed, you start noticing the words you did catch, the phrases that felt familiar, the moments where the meaning landed clearly and naturally. And that shift in focus is genuinely transformational.
Yes, and that shift is available to every single listener right now, today, in this very moment. You don't need to reach a higher level before you're allowed to look through the green window. You just choose it. You decide to approach your listening practice with curiosity and kindness towards yourself, rather than criticism and harsh judgment. That one simple internal choice changes the entire quality of your learning experience immediately.
Right, and I think this connects really beautifully to something we want to talk about next, which is the idea that you don't have to take giant leaps in your English listening journey. You don't need to go from understanding very little to understanding everything in one massive jump. The real, sustainable, and effective way to grow is through small, consistent, collected moments of focused listening practice every single day.
Oh, yes, this is one of my absolute favorite ideas to share, Abel, and I think it's going to bring such relief to so many of our listeners today. I want you to picture a wide river. On one side of that river is where you are right now, with your current listening level and your current English understanding. On the other side is confident, natural, effortless comprehension. And in between those banks are stepping stones.
And those stepping stones are not giant boulders that require a huge, terrifying leap to reach. They're manageable, steady, and within reach if you just focus on the one directly in front of you. I think so many learners look all the way across the river at the far bank and feel overwhelmed because the distance looks enormous. But if you just look down at the very next stone, the journey suddenly feels completely different.
That is the whole point, Abel. And here is a lovely little image that goes alongside the stepping stones. I want you to think of each 10 minutes of focused English listening like a coin that you drop into your pocket. It is small, it is easy to underestimate, and on its own, it might feel like it does not matter much, but over days and weeks and months, those coins add up into something genuinely valuable and powerful.
Oh, wow. I absolutely love the pocket coins image because I think we all have this tendency to discount small efforts. We think, well, I only listened for 10 minutes today. That is not enough to make a real difference. But that is completely wrong. 10 focused, intentional minutes of listening to clear English conversation is a real coin in your pocket, and every coin counts toward that total you are building every single day.
Exactly. And the beautiful thing is that those coins compound, just like savings in a bank account. The more consistent you are with your small daily deposits, the more your listening comprehension grows, and the more fluent and natural your understanding becomes. You do not need a perfect 4-hour marathon study session to make progress. You need honest, regular, small deposits made with full attention and genuine engagement.
And that is so reassuring to hear, Anna, because I think a lot of learners feel like if they cannot commit to a long, formal study block every single day, then they might as well not bother. But that all or nothing thinking is one of the most dangerous traps you can fall into as a language learner. Consistency beats intensity almost every single time when it comes to building real, lasting comprehension skills.
100% able. Consistent small coins beat rare big deposits every single time. And the stepping stone approach is how you cross the river without ever feeling like you're going to fall in. You follow along with a short podcast episode like this one, you repeat a phrase that caught your ear, you shadow a sentence or two out loud to feel how it sits in your mouth. Each of those is one stone crossed successfully.
Right, and shadowing is such a powerful tool that I think deserves a little more attention here. When you shadow a phrase or a sentence, you're not just listening passively, you're engaging your mouth, your breath, your rhythm in your ear all at the same time. That full body engagement with the language creates a much deeper, more physical memory of how English actually sounds and flows in real spoken conversation.
Yes, and that physicality of language practice is something that textbooks very rarely talk about. Real spoken English has a rhythm and a melody to it, almost like music. And just like learning to play an instrument, you don't only learn by reading about the notes, you actually have to produce the sounds yourself, feel the timing in your body, and adjust until it starts to feel natural and smooth. Shadowing is that physical rehearsal for your listening brain.
Mm-hmm. That comparison to music really lands for me, Anna, and I think it connects to something we touched on earlier, which is the idea of cadence. The natural flow and timing of English speech is so much more important than people realize. When you understand cadence, when your ear is trained to expect where the stress falls and how sentences rise and fall, you can follow a conversation so much more easily, even when individual words go by quickly.
Oh, Abel, you just brought up one of our vocabulary words for today, and I love it. Let us take a moment to explore that word together right now, because it is such a rich and useful term for English learners to understand deeply. The word is cadence, and at its most simple, cadence means the natural rhythm and flow of spoken language. It's the musical pattern of how sentences move from beginning to end.
Yes, and a great daily life example of cadence in action is something as simple as a weather presenter on the news. Have you ever noticed how they always speak with a very specific and consistent rhythm? The way they say something like, "Tomorrow will be warm and sunny with a gentle breeze in the afternoon." There's a natural rise and fall to that sentence, a predictable beat. That's cadence, and your ear learns to expect it over time.
That is a perfect example, Abel. And here's why understanding cadence is so important for listening comprehension. When you know roughly where the stress and the rhythm land in a typical English sentence, your brain can predict what's coming next even before the words arrive. That predictive listening ability is what makes fluent speakers feel like they understand everything effortlessly. They're not catching every word, they're riding the rhythm.
Oh, wow, riding the rhythm. I love that phrase so much. And it makes me think of something else that goes beautifully with cadence, which is intonation. Because I think a lot of learners focus so much on individual words and their meanings that they completely forget how much meaning is actually carried by the rise and fall of a speaker's voice, rather than the words themselves. Intonation is doing so much heavy lifting in every conversation.
Yes, and intonation is our next vocabulary word for today, so let's give it the proper time and attention it deserves. Intonation refers to the way a speaker's voice rises or falls in pitch during speech to express meaning, emotion, or emphasis. And what makes intonation so fascinating is that the exact same words can carry completely different meanings depending entirely on the intonation used by the speaker.
Mm-hmm. And a wonderful everyday example of intonation in action is something as simple as the word really. If someone says, "Really?" with a rising intonation at the end, it sounds like a genuine question, like they're surprised and asking for confirmation. But if they say, "Really?" with a flat, falling intonation, it can sound dismissive or even slightly sarcastic. Same word, completely different meaning, and the only thing that changed was the musical shape of the voice.
Exactly right, Abel. And this is why developing your listening ear for intonation is so much more valuable than memorizing lists of vocabulary words in isolation. When you understand intonation, you understand emotion, intention, and social meaning in real conversation. You can tell when someone is being sincere versus playful, questioning versus certain, enthusiastic versus uninterested. That is real communicative understanding at a deep level.
Right, and I think that is what separates genuine comprehension from just knowing words on a page. And that brings us to another beautiful concept I want to make sure we talk about today, which is the idea of simplifying your approach and cutting through all the mental fog that can make listening practice feel so overcomplicated and exhausting before you even begin.
Oh, yes, this is so important. And I want to use an image that I think will make this really clear and memorable. Imagine you are in your kitchen and you need to cut through something. If your knife is clean, sharp, and well maintained, it glides through whatever you need to cut with ease and confidence. But if that knife is dull, rusty, or covered in residue from 100 different ingredients, it becomes a struggle, a frustrating battle that leaves you exhausted.
And that image of the knife really speaks to something I used to do all the time when I was studying English more intensively. I would sit down to do a listening exercise, and immediately I would have my grammar textbook open on one side, a vocabulary list on the other side, a notebook for writing down every single unknown word, and a dictionary app ready to go. And instead of listening, I was basically drowning in tools.
Yes, Abel, and that is exactly the dull, overloaded knife scenario. When you come to a listening practice session carrying the heavy weight of every grammar rule you have ever learned, trying to analyze every sentence structure in real time, while also tracking unfamiliar vocabulary and checking definitions on the spot, your brain simply cannot do all of those things simultaneously and still genuinely follow the natural flow of the conversation.
That is so honest and accurate, Anna. And what does it mean to have a clean, sharp knife when it comes to listening practice? I think it means choosing one clear goal for each listening session. Today, I am just going to listen for overall meaning. Or today, I'm going to notice how the speakers use stress and rhythm. Having that single, clean intention makes the whole session so much more focused and so much more productive.
Exactly that, Abel. A sharp, clean knife in listening practice means tuning your ears to simple, high frequency phrases and natural speech patterns without the extra mental baggage. It means trusting your brain to absorb what it can without forcing every moment to become an analytical test. Clean, focused, and relaxed listening is how you genuinely cut through the fog of unfamiliarity and build real, lasting comprehension skills over time.
And I think there is something really freeing about that permission to simplify. Because I know so many learners who feel like if they are not analyzing and studying during every second of their English time, they're somehow being lazy or not taking it seriously enough. But actually, relaxed and open listening is a very sophisticated and productive form of language work. Your brain is doing enormous work beneath the surface, even when it feels easy.
That is so beautifully said, Abel. And this actually connects directly to something else I want to explore today, which is the idea of what happens in your brain when you remove the pressure and judgment from the listening experience. When you stop treating every listening session like a formal examination that you can pass or fail, something genuinely remarkable shifts in how your brain processes and retains the language it is hearing.
Oh, yes, and I have a really relatable personal thing to share about this. There was a period when I would listen to English podcasts, and after every few minutes, I would pause the audio and quiz myself on what I had just heard, and I would grade myself mentally, feeling proud if I got most of it, and quite discouraged if I missed things, and I genuinely believed that was the most effective and responsible way to practice listening.
And how did that approach feel over time, Abel? I'm asking because I think many of our listeners are going to recognize themselves in exactly what you're describing. That self-testing habit is incredibly common among dedicated English learners, and it comes from a genuinely good place. It comes from the desire to take the learning seriously and to hold yourself accountable for your progress. Those are beautiful instincts.
Right, and those instincts are admirable, Anna. But the result was that listening to English started to feel like a stressful obligation rather than an enjoyable experience. And because it felt stressful, I started to avoid it subconsciously. I would find other things to do instead, telling myself I would get to it later. And that avoidance was doing so much more damage to my progress than any missed word ever could have done.
And that's such a critical insight, Abel. Avoidance is the real enemy of language progress, not imperfect comprehension. And the reason avoidance happens is almost always because the learning has started to feel like judgment. So I want to introduce an idea that I find genuinely liberating for learners who are putting too much pressure on themselves. There's no teacher hiding behind your sofa while you listen to English at home.
Oh, I absolutely love that image, Anna. No teacher behind the sofa. Because I think a lot of independent learners carry this invisible, imaginary examiner around with them everywhere they go in their English learning life. They feel like every listening session is being monitored and graded, like there's someone waiting to catch every mistake and mark them down for it. And that feeling makes the whole experience so unnecessarily tense and unpleasant.
Yes, and here's the liberating truth. Your private listening practice is yours alone. It belongs to you completely. There's no judge sitting in the corner watching your comprehension rate. There's no grade being recorded somewhere. There's no one waiting to evaluate your performance and tell you whether you passed or failed today's listening session. It's just you, the language, and a beautiful open space for genuine exploration and growth.
And when you really take that in and believe it, something shifts immediately. You start listening differently. You become more curious and less defensive. You let the conversation wash over you rather than trying to capture and control every piece of it. And paradoxically, that relaxed and open state of mind is when your brain absorbs the most language naturally and efficiently. The pressure was actually getting in the way of the very thing you wanted most.
Exactly. The subconscious brain is an extraordinary language learning machine, but it works best when it's not being watched and judged constantly. Think about how children learn to speak their first language. Nobody is standing over them grading their attempts. Nobody marks them down for mispronouncing a word or confusing a grammatical structure. They're just immersed in language, playing with it, absorbing it freely, and it sticks beautifully.
And that comparison to children always makes me think about something important, which is the role of comfort and enjoyment in language acquisition. Children don't think of learning to speak as studying, they think of it as experiencing the world. And as adult English learners, the closer we can get to that relaxed, exploratory, experience-oriented mindset during our listening practice, the closer we come to that natural and effortless kind of language absorption.
Yes, 100%. And that leads us beautifully to something I want to bring up now, which is a small but incredibly powerful word that I think every English learner should keep close to their heart. A word that can completely transform the way you think about your current listening challenges and your current comprehension level. That word is yet. Three tiny letters that carry an enormous amount of hope and forward momentum.
Oh, I genuinely love this topic so much, Anna, because I remember very clearly the kinds of things I used to say to myself when I was struggling with my listening comprehension. Things like, I cannot catch fast English speech. I cannot follow this conversation. I cannot understand this speaker when they talk naturally. And those statements felt like absolute facts to me, like they were just true descriptions of a permanent reality I was stuck in.
And they are such common and understandable thoughts, Abel. But here is the transformational shift. When you add the word yet to the end of any one of those sentences, the entire meaning changes. I cannot catch fast English speech becomes I cannot catch fast English speech yet. And that one tiny word opens a door in your mind that the original sentence had firmly shut and locked. It turns a permanent wall into a temporary point on a journey.
And that shift from permanent to temporary is absolutely everything, Anna. Because the moment you add yet, you are acknowledging where you are right now without accepting it as your final destination. You were saying, yes, this is my current reality, and that is completely okay, and also, I am moving forward, and this is going to change. That dual acknowledgement of honesty and hope is such a healthy and effective mindset for a language learner.
Exactly that, Abel. Yet is a word that keeps the path open. It keeps the garden growing. It keeps the stepping stones visible in front of you, even on the harder days when the cloudy window seems very tempting to look through. And I want to suggest to every one of our listeners that whenever you catch yourself saying, I cannot understand this, or my listening is too weak, you pause, you add yet, and you feel what that does to your energy.
Right, and what I find especially beautiful about the word yet is that it also implies action without demanding it immediately. It is patient. It is not saying you need to fix this right now or urgently rush to close the gap. It is simply holding space for the future improvement that is already underway. Because every single time you sit down with intention and listen to natural English, you are already proving that yet is true and your progress is already happening.
Beautifully said, Abel. And I want to add something here that connects the word yet to the broader journey of listening confidence, because I think there's sometimes a mistaken belief that fluency in listening or confident comprehension is something that arrives all at once, like a sudden gift or a dramatic breakthrough moment. But that is almost never how it actually happens for most learners in real everyday life.
Oh, yes, and I love the analogy you use for this, Anna. The one about the slow friend on an afternoon walk, because I think it captures so perfectly the way fluency and comprehension confidence actually develop over time. It does not roar up to you in a fast car without warning, it strolls towards you gradually. And if you keep walking forward yourself, you eventually meet somewhere in the middle on a beautiful, calm day.
Yes, that is exactly the image. Imagine you're walking down a long, peaceful road in the late afternoon. Somewhere behind you on that same road is your English fluency and your listening confidence. They are real, they exist, they are already on the road with you, but they walk at their own pace, and they cannot be rushed or forced to run just because you want them to arrive sooner.
And the wonderful thing about that image is that your job is not to stop and wait desperately or to sprint frantically back down the road looking for fluency. Your job is simply to keep walking forward at your own steady, intentional, consistent pace. And because fluency is also moving forward, because you are practicing every day and every session is doing its work, the gap between you and your slow friend gets smaller and smaller naturally.
Exactly right, Abel. And one day, without a dramatic announcement or a fanfare, you realize that your slow friend has caught up. You're sitting in a conversation and you notice that you followed everything without effort. You watched a video and realized you didn't need the subtitles. You listened to a podcast and caught 95% on the very first listen. And that's your slow friend arriving, right on schedule, just like they always were going to.
Oh, wow. That is such a genuinely moving way to think about the language journey, Anna. And I think it removes so much of the anxiety and desperation that can sometimes make language learning feel like a race against time or a competition with other learners. You are not racing anyone. Your slow friend is already on the road with you. Your only job is to keep showing up and to trust the process with patience and confidence.
That's the perfect summary of that idea, Abel. Keep showing up and trust the process. And that brings us to something I want to talk about next, which is the idea of context and how it's one of the most powerful and underutilized listening tools that English learners have available to them in every single conversation they encounter, whether it's a podcast, a movie, a conversation, or a real-life interaction.
Yes, context is such a powerful word and concept in the world of listening and comprehension, and I think a lot of learners underestimate it because they focus so heavily on individual word meanings. But the truth is that even if you miss a word or a phrase during a conversation, the context around it is almost always giving you enough information to understand what is being communicated in the broader sense.
Absolutely, Abel. And context is our next vocabulary word for today. So let us define it clearly and simply. Context means the surrounding information, circumstances, and setting that help you understand the meaning of something you hear or read. In listening practice, context includes the topic of the conversation, the relationship between the speakers, the tone of voice, and the words and sentences that came before and after the part you are focusing on.
And a great everyday example of context doing its work is something like this. Imagine you are at a coffee shop and you hear someone say, "I will have the usual, please." You might not know anything about that person specifically, but the context tells you everything you need. They are in a coffee shop, they are speaking to the person behind the counter, and they have clearly been there before. You understand the full meaning without needing any extra information.
That is such a wonderful and simple example, Abel. And in English listening practice, training yourself to use context actively is one of the biggest leaps forward you can make. Instead of stopping mentally every time you hit an unknown word, you learn to keep moving forward and let the context do its natural work. 9 times out of 10, the meaning of that unknown word will reveal itself through what comes next in the conversation.
Right, and that connects to our next key concept, which is something I feel very strongly about. It is the idea of active listening as a distinct and intentional practice rather than just a passive experience of being around English sounds. I think the phrase active listening is used a lot, but not always fully explained in a way that makes it practical and actionable for everyday learners who want real results.
You are so right, Abel. And active listening is indeed our next vocabulary word for this episode. So let us define it clearly. Active listening means being fully mentally engaged in what you are hearing, making conscious efforts to understand not just the words, but the meaning, the emotion, the intention, and the message behind what the speaker is communicating. It's listening with your whole mind, not just your ears.
And a great way to practice active listening in everyday life is something as simple as listening to a short English conversation and then immediately afterwards, without looking anything up, trying to summarize in your own words what the conversation was about, who felt what, and what the main message was. That simple act of internal summarizing is an incredibly powerful exercise for strengthening your comprehension muscles dramatically over time.
Exactly that, Abel. And notice that the summary exercise does not require you to have understood every single word or phrase. It asks you what was the overall meaning and the emotional truth of what you just heard. And that is a much more authentic and useful measure of real comprehension than whether you can define every vocabulary item used by the speakers. Real conversation comprehension is about meaning, not word lists.
Right, and I think this is a good moment to also mention our next vocabulary word, which is comprehension itself. Because comprehension is such a central and frequently used word in the world of English learning, but I think it is worth defining clearly and giving it a real grounded human meaning rather than just the academic textbook version that students often encounter on language learning courses and formal assessments.
Yes, wonderful. Comprehension, at its simplest, means understanding. In the context of English listening, comprehension is your ability to understand the meaning of what you hear. But I want to expand on that definition a little, because real comprehension in natural conversation is not just intellectual understanding of vocabulary and grammar, it also includes emotional understanding, tonal understanding, and the ability to read between the lines of what is being said.
And a beautiful everyday example of full comprehension in action is something like when a friend calls you and says, "Oh, I'm fine," in a voice that tells you immediately they are absolutely not fine at all. You comprehend the situation fully, not because of the words they used, but because of the tone, the context, the relationship, and all the subtle layers of meaning that spoken language carries beneath its surface. That is full, real comprehension.
That is such a rich and true example, Abel, and it highlights why listening in English is so much more than a vocabulary exercise. It's a full sensory and intuitive engagement with another human being's communication. And the more you listen with your whole self, the more your comprehension deepens naturally. You stop translating and you start understanding directly, which is the ultimate goal of everything we practice together here on this podcast.
That phrase really lands for me, Anna. Stopping translating and starting to understand directly. Because I think that transition is the moment most learners are really working toward, even if they don't always have words for it. When you stop going, okay, I heard that word, now what does it mean in my language? What is the equivalent? And instead you just feel the meaning arrive directly in your mind. That is a massive leap in fluency and comprehension.
Exactly that, Abel. And that direct understanding is built through massive amounts of natural, repeated, engaged listening. It doesn't come from studying more grammar tables or memorizing more isolated vocabulary lists. It comes from hours of genuine exposure to clear, natural human English conversation. And that's exactly why episodes like this one matter so much. Not because we're teaching you rules, but because we're giving you real language to absorb.
Exactly, Anna. And I want to bring up our next vocabulary word here because I think it connects so naturally to everything we've been talking about. The word is fluid. Because when we talk about English listening and conversation goals, one of the most common things learners say they want is to be able to follow and participate in conversations that feel fluid, natural, and effortless. And I think it's worth spending a moment on what that actually means in practice.
Yes, fluid is a lovely word. Fluid means smooth, natural, and flowing without unnecessary interruption or difficulty. In the context of spoken English and listening comprehension, a fluid conversation is one where the exchange of ideas and meaning flows comfortably between speakers without long, awkward pauses, excessive corrections, or the need to constantly stop and clarify. It has a rhythm and an ease to it that makes communication feel genuinely pleasurable.
And a wonderful everyday image of fluid conversation is two old friends catching up after a long time apart. They're finishing each other's sentences, laughing at shared references, jumping between topics effortlessly, and neither person is working hard to understand the other. The conversation has its own natural current, and they're both just riding it together comfortably. That is the feeling of fluid spoken English at its most beautiful and natural.
That is such a perfect image, Abel. And here's the important thing to understand about fluid conversation as a goal. Fluidity is not about speaking fast. Please hear this clearly because it is one of the biggest misconceptions I encounter. Fluidity is about smoothness, not speed. A slow, calm, clear conversation delivered with natural rhythm and connected thought is infinitely more fluid and more impressive than frantic, fast speech full of hesitations and stumbles.
Oh, that is such a liberating thing to hear, Anna. Because I know so many learners who are rushing their English, trying to speak as fast as possible because they think that speed is what fluency looks like. But you are absolutely right. The most fluid and impressive English speakers I have ever listened to are the ones who speak at a measured, confident, clear pace. Speed is never the goal. Smoothness and clarity are the real targets to aim for.
Exactly right, Abel. And that smoothness connects directly to our final vocabulary word for today, which is articulation. Articulation is a word that applies to both listening and speaking, and it is one that I think deserves a really clear and practical definition so our learners can use it confidently in their understanding of what good English communication actually involves at a deeper level.
Yes, and articulation is such a great word to close out our vocabulary section with. What does it mean, simply and clearly, Anna? Because I have heard it used in so many different contexts, and I want to make sure our listeners have a really grounded and usable understanding of what it actually refers to when we talk about articulation in the context of spoken English and listening comprehension practice.
Of course, articulation means the clear and precise formation and delivery of sounds, words, and ideas in spoken language. When a speaker is well articulated, their words are clearly shaped, their meaning is easy to follow, and their communication has a satisfying clarity and precision to it. In listening practice, listening to well-articulated speakers helps your ear learn the precise sound shapes of English words and phrases at their clearest and most natural best.
And a perfect everyday example of articulation in action is a teacher explaining a concept to a classroom. A great teacher does not just talk quickly and hope the students keep up. They speak clearly, they choose their words with intention, they shape each idea with care, and they make sure their delivery has a quality that makes complex things feel accessible and understandable. That is articulation at its most purposeful and effective in real-life communication.
Beautiful example, Abel. And that is why listening to clearly articulated English, whether in a podcast like this one, in well-produced English videos, or in conversations with clear and patient speakers, is one of the most valuable things you can do for your listening comprehension development. You are training your ear on the clearest possible model of how English sounds, which makes all other forms of English easier to understand over time.
Right, and I think this is a wonderful moment to start bringing things together, Anna, because we have covered so much beautiful and practical ground today. From the water bottle of attention to the two windows, from stepping stones and pocket coins to the clean knife of focused listening, and from the word yet to the slow friend of fluency. Each of these ideas carries something genuinely valuable for anyone who wants to grow as an English listener.
Yes, Abel. And I love how you just wove all of those ideas back together so naturally. That is exactly the kind of integrated, connected thinking that strong listening comprehension builds over time. You start to see how everything is related, how every concept connects to the next, and how the whole picture of language learning is actually a unified and coherent journey, rather than a collection of isolated skills to master one by one in isolation.
And speaking of bringing things together, I would love to offer a summary for our listeners, because I know that after a rich and detailed conversation like this one, it can be really helpful to hear the key ideas gathered together in one clear and connected overview. So let me try to do that now in a way that captures the spirit and the heart of everything we have explored together today in this wonderful episode.
Please go ahead, Abel. I would love to hear your summary, and I know our listeners are going to find it incredibly valuable as a final review before they carry these ideas into their own listening practice today.
Thank you, Anna. So here's what we explored today. Real English listening practice is not about surviving overwhelming fast speech or sitting through robotic audio. It's about training your ear through calm, clear, and natural conversations. Your daily listening attention is precious, like water in a bottle, and intentional, focused listening for even 40 minutes is worth far more than hours of distracted background noise. When frustration hits and the cloudy window appears, remember the green garden on the other side and choose to look through that clear pane of possibility instead.
Yes, and please continue, Abel. You are doing a wonderful job of weaving it all together so clearly.
Thank you, Anna. We also talked about crossing the river of comprehension one stepping stone at a time, collecting small 10-minute coins of focused listening every day rather than waiting for a perfect marathon session that may never arrive. We talked about keeping your listening approach clean and sharp, like a well-maintained knife, tuning into natural speech patterns and high-frequency phrases without the heavy baggage of over-analysis. And we remembered that there is no teacher behind the sofa judging your private practice. Relaxed listening is powerful listening.
Beautifully done, Abel. And what about the word yet and the slow friend? Those two ideas are so close to my heart, and I know they will resonate deeply with so many of our listeners who are in the middle of their journey right now and might be feeling a little impatient with their progress.
Absolutely, Anna. We embrace the magic word yet, which transforms every I can't into I can't yet, keeping the path forward open and alive with possibility and hope. And we remembered that listening confidence and fluency are like a slow friend walking behind us on the same road. They're already on their way. Our only job is to keep walking forward with consistency, patience, and trust in the process. And we also explored 7 beautiful words together, including comprehension, cadence, intonation, context, active listening, fluid, and articulation, each one a tool to deepen our understanding of the listening journey.
That was an absolutely gorgeous summary, Abel. I am genuinely so proud of everything we covered today, and I hope every single listener who has been with us from the very beginning of this episode is feeling inspired, encouraged, and equipped to go out and practice their English listening with fresh energy and a warm, open mindset. You are doing an amazing job just by being here and giving your time and attention to your language growth.
And that's something I always want to say to our listeners as well. The fact that you chose to spend time with us today, that you gave this episode your focused attention and your open heart, that is already an act of courage and commitment. Language learning is one of the most beautiful and meaningful journeys a person can undertake, and every single minute you invest in it is a minute that counts and matters deeply.
And on that beautiful note, I want to ask all of you something before we close. I want you to drop a comment right now below this video or this podcast episode and share with us how long you spent listening to English today. It doesn't matter if it was 10 minutes or 2 hours. Every amount is worth celebrating, and we genuinely love reading your progress updates and cheering you on from this side of the microphone. Your consistency is your superpower, so let's celebrate it together right now.
Oh yes, please do drop that comment. We read every single one, and it genuinely makes our day to hear from you. Whether you're a brand new listener or someone who has been with us for a long time, your voice matters here, and your progress is worth acknowledging out loud. So tell us how long you listened today, and let's cheer for you together as a community of English learners, all growing forward on this wonderful journey.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep speaking with confidence and ease. This is Anna.
And this is Abel, and you have been listening to the Mr. English Fluid Tutor Podcast. Bye-bye. Take care.
And if you're ready to keep your English progress moving forward right now, go ahead and click on the next video. Your next step in this language journey is already waiting for you, and we'll see you there very soon.